Welcome everyone to the Watershed Moment Interfaith Dialogue. My name is Leah Wisty and I'm the Executive Director of Michigan Interfaith Power and Light. And we just opened with a song that was selected by one of our panelists, Rabbi Nate DeGroot, who will tell us a little bit about that in a moment. But first, I'd just like to invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Just your name, where you're from, if you're connected to a faith community, we'd be interested to hear. So you can find the chat probably just below where my face is, across the toolbar on the bottom. And we're still letting some folks in from the waiting room. Hi, Cindy with Friends of the Rouge, Jim, Ecumenical Theological Seminary in Detroit, Steve from St. Suzanne's, David from Hazlitt Community Church in the Lansing area, Judy, Temple Emmanuel in Oak Park. All right, a lot of them coming in. I can't quite keep up. Somebody from Boston, Rabbi Nate's mom, that's outstanding. Welcome, Judy. Okay, great. Well, we're so delighted that you all have taken time out of your busy schedules to join us for this really important conversation. So I just wanted to introduce Michigan Interfaith Power and Light for a moment in case you are new to us. So we are about a 20-year-old nonprofit, and our mission is to inspire and equip people of faith and conscience to be better stewards of Earth. And we focus a lot on energy and more recently on water issues. And we have about 300 member congregations across the state of Michigan from more than 20 religious traditions and Christian denominations. We're recording this and the recording will be sent out. I also want to let you know that we'll be taking questions in the chat throughout the conversation. There will be time for folks to ask questions verbally at the end and participate in the discussion, but also feel free to drop any questions that you have into the chat. I wanted to, start with a poll. I'm going to pull that up right now. And the poll question is asking, if you are connected with some kind of religious or spiritual community, do you hear about issues of water and water justice from your leaders? So sometimes we know that a lot of members of religious community care deeply about these issues, but they may or may not be hearing about them from their clergy. So we're just trying to gauge what's that situation. And then at the end of this, we're going to share some sermon resources and we're going to issue a call, right? For those of you who are able to do so, or to encourage your religious leader to do so, to speak about these issues from the pulpit. All right, I'm going to share the poll results. Okay, so we're seeing that like more than half are hearing about issues of water and water justice from your religious leaders if you are connected with a faith community or a tradition. About 27% don't hear about these issues, and about 15% are not sure. Okay, so more on sermon resources and how you can make this happen in your community later on. All right, so what are we doing here tonight? We're going to hear from 3 religious leaders to talk about water justice, earth stewardship from the perspective of their unique traditions. It's an interfaith dialogue, and I want to be clear about what that means. So that means we're going to be talking about a lot of issues in common, but from distinct perspectives. So some traditions have shared religious texts, but they bring to them distinct interpretations. So we're not trying to collapse all of those into one narrow band of agreement, but we're interested to hear the diversity of perspectives on these things. And we're also talking about this because water issues are so huge in Michigan and Detroit. Those of us living in Detroit have experienced a lot of flooding over the summer. We've got an old combined sewer system that processes both stormwater runoff and sewage all in one place. And when we have big rainstorms, the system is overwhelmed. It releases sewage into the Detroit River and ultimately our Great Lakes. Basements flood. It causes all manner of hardship. We also want to marry this conversation about, our water and sewer system with issues of water justice. We, the people of Detroit, has estimated that over 100,000 Detroit households have had their water turned off since 2014. And we noticed in the public conversation, often these issues are articulated separately. And so one of our goals tonight is to bring those issues together, right? Both how do we be stewards of our watershed and what's the call to do so? And how do we also attend to issues of water justice and water access? So Michigan IPL is a member of the Land and Water Works Coalition, working on some stormwater issues as well. And we're gonna be providing some resources and information about that. So, okay, with all that under our belts, I am going to introduce our first speaker. We're delighted to have with us Rabbi Nate DeGroot, who is of Chazon, Detroit, and is also a rabbi serving a couple of congregations in Michigan. He's going to bring us a Jewish perspective on these issues. Rabbi Nate, take it away.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Leah, and thank you so much to all of the panelists, Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and everyone who is attending this evening. I'm really glad to be here. I'm going to put in the chat in just a moment, but that song that I was playing at the beginning is called Water Heal My Soul. It was written and sung, or it was taught to Batya Levine and Rabbi Noam Lerman during a morning water ceremony that took place at Standing Rock Reservation when they were there during the holiday of Sukkot. It was taught to them by someone named Leah. I'll put a link to the song in the chat. And I think right off the bat, that really kind of centers us in so many of these issues from a Jewish perspective, from a perspective of solidarity and equity, from an indigenous perspective, all of these places kind of colliding in this incredible sacred element of water that permeates all of our lives, our bodies, all of our traditions as well. I'm going to put into the chat also, before I put a link into the song, a link to a source sheet. It is way longer than what we're going to be able to get to talk about in the next 6-7 minutes, but feel free to open it up into a tab, save it for later if you're interested. A lot in there from the 5 books of Moses and beyond, from a Jewish perspective related to water. So I will kind of talk through this source sheet, but we definitely won't touch on probably even a third of it. I organized this source sheet into 4 main categories, and this is what I want to kind of drive home to begin with. The 4 main categories that, as I was kind of thinking about how to sum up over 2,000 years, really closer to 3,000 or 4,000 years of Jewish tradition, which is so deeply rooted and related to water and the natural world, into a 7 or 8 minute presentation. These were the 4 categories that really stood out to me, especially for this topic tonight. So the first one you'll see right at the top of the page is water as divine. The second topic is rain as moral. Rain as moral. The third topic is rain as a public good, or water as a public good. And the fourth is Sukkot and Rain, related to the festival that we're actually in right now. So I'm just going to touch on each of these I'll indicate what sources they're coming from, but kind of talk them through. So in Jewish tradition, when we're trying to seek meaning, when we're going back to our sources and trying to understand the significance of something, we oftentimes look for the first time that a given word or concept appears in our text. And so, doing that off the top of my head and going back to the sources today, right? It's actually the second line of the book of Genesis, Bereshit, that we first see Mayim, the Hebrew word for water. So the first line of Bereshit of Genesis, when God began to create the heaven and earth, which already actually has kind of a derivative of the word mayim in it. You'll see shamayim, which is the heaven. Heaven is shamayim. And then the second line, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God sweeping over the water, water being mayim. So right at the start, the very beginning of our sacred sources, we kind of have the stage set for creation, for our entire mythology, which is that the Spirit of God is hovering over the water. So there's some already kind of ephemeral and deeply rooted spiritual connection to water that we find right there. And also kind of a hint at the connection between water, mayim, and the heavens, shamayim. And that's really where the next piece comes in, which the very beginning of creation, the second day, right after light and darkness is created, God separates the waters below from the waters above and creates a rakia, a kind of firmament is usually how it's translated, between the waters below and the waters above. So you have the mayim on the physical earthly plane, and you have the shamayim in the kind of ethereal divine realm. And so you can kind of start to see that our connection with water and the heavens, the rain and the evaporation and the sky and the condensation, this whole water cycle really becomes a kind of divine movement between us and our experience of water, and then this kind of shamayim, this divine plane, right? Water is not always good though, right? Divine doesn't just mean positive, because pretty soon after that, there's other instances, but of water being mentioned, but pretty soon after that, right, we have the flood, where God destroys the entire world outside of Noah and the creatures that were on the ark, using water through a flood, right? So we begin to see that water has these kind of two sides to it, the divine kind of beautiful side and really wonderful side, and then the more scary and threatening side, which is the side of the flood. And over time, Jewish tradition begins to assign a lot of different symbolism to the idea of water. First of all, water is living, mayim chayim. So the divine kind of creates this water, and it cleanses, it renews, gives rebirth in all sorts of different ways, primarily through what we call mikvah, which is a ritual immersion, which is used for conversion ceremonies, as well as kind of purity or ritual preparedness ceremonies. And water becomes compared to Torah and justice and redemption. All of these pieces start to play into the role of water. Transitioning a little bit, rain and rainwater specifically becomes a moral issue. We are told in Deuteronomy and Devarim and Leviticus and other places, basically, if you follow God's commandments, if you are going to live a righteous life and a life that is in tune with the natural world and with people around you, that actually the rains will fall in their seasons, they'll fall for good, there'll be plenty and produce abundance, and you'll be living a life of blessing. And if you don't listen to God's commandments, if you're living outside of right relationship with the earth, then actually the skies will turn to iron and the ground will turn to copper, and there will be drought, and actually the rain won't fall in its season. And here, I think it's important, at least from my vantage point, to say that that I don't see this as kind of divine punishment from a divine other that is upset at us for not following commandments. I see this as the direct result of us living outside of right relationship with the earth. That when we are not in right relationship, that the result of that is the climate catastrophe that we're experiencing all around us, and that thousands of years ago was already predicted. Third, rain is a public good, water is a public good. There's all sorts of rules here that I think are really interesting to actually explore, which basically say that water needs to be treated with respect. Water needs to be treated as a public good for people who need it most. It needs to be overseen and paid for, and the structures and apparatus need to be developed by the institutions of a society who are responsible to ensure that all its citizens have water, which is really crucial. And then I'll just wrap up with the last piece, which is Sukkot and Rain. There's lots to read here, but this holiday, so after Rosh Hashanah, after Yom Kippur comes Sukkot, which we're in right now. We're in the kind of intermediate days between the big festivals at the beginning and the end. It's our fall harvest festival, and it's our festival of rain. We actually change our prayer service at the end of this festival to begin including a prayer for rain. We shake 4 species of plant life and walk around in circles, chanting supplications for rain. Of course, all of these traditions and customs and rituals came from a time and place in the arid desert of the Middle East, in which right now is the transition into the rainy season. And so if my ancestors thousands of years ago wanted to be able to eat come springtime and have their crops actually take root and produce abundantly come springtime, it was critical that rain would fall during this season. This is our time of joy, Zman Simchatenu, our happiest time on the calendar. And that aligns with the final thing that I'll say, which we're told that rainfall is as wondrous as the creation of heaven and earth. From the very beginning, that rain can bring that kind of joy. Of course, in this moment, as we're staring down 3 straight days of rain in a summer of immense flooding and destructive rain, that means the proper amount of rain in its right season, in its right time, and with an equitable and supportive infrastructure to allow that rain to be supportive and not destructive. So thank you, and I look forward to the ongoing conversation.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Nate. For those who have recently joined, just a reminder that you can drop questions in the chat at any time. We're going to proceed to our next panelist, then there will be time for a discussion and including hearing from all of you. So I'm going to next turn it over to Imam Mustafa Elturk. He is the Imam at the Islamic Organization of North America, and he's also been involved in the People's Waterboard of Detroit for a long time. So take it away, Imam Mustafa.
Am I unmuted?
You sure are.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Leah, and thank you, Rabbi, for the gracious words from your perspective, religious perspective. First of all, thank you all for coming, and I want to give special thanks to my people in the Interfaith Justice Committee and also the People's Waterboard. I will be speaking from our perspective, but I'm going to begin with water is indispensable, water is sacred, water is life, water is a human right. I begin by praising God Almighty, who through his mercy, kindness, and love gave us fresh, sweet water to drink, as articulated by Rabbi Nate, and did not make it salty or bitter due to our sins. Water is the most essential element of life, as we all know. It is the essence of life. According to our Islamic tradition, the Quran, Muslims' holy book, God informs, we have made out of water every living thing. The miracle of the well of Zamzam in Mecca saved the lives of Ishmael, Abraham's infant son, who was left with his mother Hagar in a barren desert. Had it not been for water, an entire race of nearly 2 billion people today would not have existed. Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, traces his lineage back to Ishmael. The same well that saved the lives of Hagar and Ishmael provides drink to millions of pilgrims from all walks of life and unite them under one humanity. Water is the source of life, and water is what binds us all. Not only Ishmael, son of Prophet Abraham, is linked to water. Other prophets are linked to water as well. Moses, peace be upon him, was instructed to strike the rock with his staff. According to the Quranic account, this is verse number 60 from the 2nd chapter. and mention, O Prophet Muhammad, when Moses prayed for water for his people, and we replied, strike the rock with your staff, whereupon 12 springs gushed forth from it, and each tribe of the 12 tribes of Jacob knew its drinking place. God admonishes, eat and drink from God's provision and do not cause corruption in the land. Water is God's given right to every human being. Shutting off water to people who are unable to pay the water bill is a form of corruption. Muhammad, peace be upon him, in one of his sayings, made sure that we understand this. He says, all of you are shepherds and all of you are responsible. Indeed, we, individually and collectively, bear the responsibility of being stewards and guardians of the great and magnificent creation God had created for us. It is our responsibility to see to it that our environment is clean and safe, and that water is accessible to all people without any exception. Water is indispensable. It is one of the fundamental and most basic human rights. The other rights include food, clothing, and shelter. Prophet Muhammad said, there are no rights that the son of Adam is more entitled to than these 4 rights. Number 1, a house to dwell in. 2, a garment to cover his nakedness. 3, a piece of bread. And 4, water. Lack of water threatens the very life of people. Hence, water is a basic and fundamental human right. All living things, including humans, who are at the top of God's creation, should have the right and access to clean water wherever they may be, including residents of Detroit and elsewhere. One may ask, where is the sense of being human, considerate, concerned, merciful, compassionate, and empathetic? A prostitute has more empathy than many of the most wealthy and greedy people. Let me share with you this narration. Prophet Muhammad says, forgiveness is granted to a prostitute who passed by a dog panting near a well. Thirst had nearly killed him, so she took off her leather sock, tied it to her veil, and drew up some water. God forgave her for that. A simple act of compassion caused all her sins to be forgiven. What has become of people? They have become desensitized, insensible, numb, walking humans with dead hearts. Muhammad described an empathetic community by saying the parable of the believers in their affection, mercy, and compassion for each other is that of a body. When any limb aches, the whole body reacts with sleeplessness and fever. We are a community, one body. When a member, a resident of the community, a Muslim or non-Muslim, is afflicted with hardship and suffering, we must all feel the pain. As stewards, we should be at the forefront with other people of conscience, fighting for the weak and vulnerable, fighting for their basic human right, the right to water. And now, if you allow me, if I have a couple of minutes, Leah, I would like to read the recent faith statement from the Interfaith Justice Committee of the People's Waterboard Coalition, where I happen to serve. As a matter of fact, Reverend Roslyn, one of the panelists, served on the committee as well. So if I may, I would like to read that statement for you. I don't know if I can share, I'm sure I can share the document with everybody as I read it. Let me see. Where would that be? Let me get to it. I don't want to waste time here. I don't know where it is, but at any rate, maybe, oh, it's right here. Okay, so this is the water statement from the Interfaith Justice Committee. Water is essential to life. Water is central to all of the religions of the world. We are people of various spiritual and religious backgrounds who are united in the belief that no one should ever be denied access to clean, safe, affordable water. We believe that water is sacred in and of itself, our beloved kin and relation. Water is not a commodity, it is a trust endowed by our Creator. Whether part of our sacred stories, solemn rituals, sacraments, or shared values, water is more than a symbol. Not only is water a human right, water is life. The lack of water threatens the lives of people and disrupts community health and well-being. Without water, people cannot drink, bathe, cook, flush toilets, or maintain sanitation. Water shutoffs can result in health and human services removing children from the home. Shutoffs have also played a role in infectious disease contamination and lead poisoning to tragic effect. These are unprecedented times that demand a clear moral response that upholds the common good. The moratorium on shutoffs need to be permanent and combined with a water affordability plan. We call upon all local governments to use federal and state dollars to assist families at risk of water having their water shut off and support ongoing efforts to make water affordable. Simply adding delinquent water bills to taxes is not the solution, since it often results in struggling families losing their homes to foreclosures. We need an affordability plan that allows all people to pay their water bills and keep their homes. We believe that the measure of a society is how it treats those who are struggling to afford life's necessities, especially water. As people of faith, we stand in support of Resolution 64/292 of the United Nations General Assembly that explicitly recognizes the human right to water and sanitation and acknowledges that clean drinking water and sanitation are essential to the realization of all human rights. To deny our neighbors access to water is to deny their human dignity and their human rights. We have a moral and religious obligation to respect and protect water for the sake of our children and the generations to come. The Interfaith Justice Committee. The People's Water Board Coalition advocates for the human rights to water and sanitation and equitable access and affordability for impacted communities. I encourage your audience, Leah, to check out the People's Water Board website. It's www.peopleswaterboard.org. Thank you so very much for giving me this opportunity, and God bless.
Thank you so much, Imam. And if you've got the link, if we could share the statement that you just read, we can follow up with participants so they can take a look at that.
Sure.
Great. Okay, next up, I'm going to present to you Reverend Roslyn Bouier. Reverend Roz wears many hats as well. She is the pastor of Trinity St. Mark's United Church of Christ in Detroit. She is the executive director of Brightmoor Connection Food Pantry, and she's also involved in the People's Water Board, and she's going to be sharing a Christian perspective on these issues. Reverend Roz.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you to the panelists, to all those who are listening. I am excited to be here. I truly appreciate this opportunity to share. So, and then let me add in as well with being the pastor of Trinity St. Mark's, which is a high honor and privilege, but I also am a new church start planter with the beloved community, UCC. I want to make sure I include this beloved community as well. So let me say that I know that we're meeting today. The conversation is around water stewardship, most especially as it relates to those who are in leadership and even in laity, but how we serve in that capacity, right? I believe that's the framework I want to speak from today. Brightmore Connection sits in the northwest section of Detroit. Jennifer asked that I share this information. I want to do this very briefly. Brightmore Connection has the distinct honor of serving over 3,000 households. But Brightmore, the community of Brightmore is unique in that it has the highest population of water shutoffs, and of course would have quite naturally the highest population of COVID-19 cases as well. Families in the community have been disinherited and disenfranchised, most especially with the weaponization of water. Water should never be used as a weapon, and that is exactly what we have seen happen over the last 7 years in the city of Detroit, where water has been weaponized to where some get to live, some are forced to die, because that is exactly what it has come to in Brightmore and surrounding communities. Brightmore also has a unique distinction of having a one of the highest populations of infant mortality death in the womb and out of the womb due to the lack of access to water. As the good Imam just shared, and Rabbi has also shared so eloquently, water is a human right. It is not a privilege. It is meant for all. That is just what it is. There's no other way to put it. Water affordability is what we are asking for, right? It's always about policy. We always go back to the policies, and that is where our voices can be greatly heard. But from the Christian perspective, let me take us to the Revised Common Lectionary text from this past Sunday. The Revised Common Lectionary text lifted up the text in Mark chapter 9, verses 30 through 37. And the text speaks about Jesus is speaking to his disciples. They're on their way through Galilee, on their way to Capernaum, right? And so Jesus is sharing with the disciples that he is to be betrayed and he will be killed and he will be resurrected in 3 days. And they're on this journey and they get to this house in Capernaum, which is believed to be Peter's house. And in this house, Jesus asked the disciples, what were you arguing about? What were you having a discussion about? What was it that caught your attention that took it away from what I was sharing, basically? The disciples did not answer because, as all of us as humans, they were embarrassed as to why they were arguing. They were arguing over who was the greatest. Who was the greatest was their argument. Who would hold that position, that authority of being the greatest? And Jesus begins to teach on the subject of greatness. And I believe this is what is appropriate as a Christian in this conversation at this time, right? Jesus explains to the disciples that this greatness, this thing that you are hungering for, that you're coveting, that you're looking and seeking to hold, this idea of greatness is truly not what you think it is. Greatness is service. It is about serving all. And then Jesus begins to share how that as holding this position of greatness, it requires us to be concerned about the most vulnerable, the least in community, those who have the least amount of power. Jesus goes on to bring a child upon his lap and he welcomes this child and he uses this child as a metaphor and says, whoever welcomes the child welcomes me, but not only me, but my Father who has sent me. And this child is representative. In antiquity, children had no power. They were those who had no authority. They were without any ability to make decisions. They had the least amount of notoriety in community, but they were most vulnerable. And that is who we are seeing experiencing water shutoffs. That is exactly what we see constantly happening in our communities. Jesus admonishes the disciples to be mindful that if you're asking to be great, if that is your desire, greatness looks like service. And the only way to be great is to be a servant of all, and not just all, but all of creation. And so if we seek to be great as leaders, if what we are looking to do is be good stewards of each other and God's earth, then what that requires is that we be stewards of each other, but more importantly, that we place and put into perspective this idea that the least in community, those who are most vulnerable, those who have the least amount of power, the expectation is that we lift them up, we become the advocates. That is how we become great, right? That is the lesson from this past Sunday's Revised Common Lectionary. And so the question becomes, when it comes to water affordability, we talk about water stewardship, what are we doing that signifies our greatness? What do we do daily that says, yes, I am great. I am definitely a great person because I am advocating and fighting for the water accessibility for others, but not just water, right? But that also for clean air, safe, affordable housing. These are the things that we have the ability to do as advocates, as servants, as those who seek to attain greatness, right? Through the lens of Christianity. And then when if we really want to look at it, we can look back in the book of Amos, and the prophet Amos shares how this mindset of religiosity has overtaken those in the community, right? Amos brings up, he says, there's a depersonalization of those who have wealth and who are not concerned with those who do not have. And there's this idea that this concept of going to church, being at this synagogue, being at this temple, being in this congregation, being in any church setting makes us holy. And Amos is challenging that. And he says, no, it is the aspect of service. That is what we're called to do. So when we talk about water stewardship, what we're talking about is service to all. There's an expectation in Christianity that we become co-creators with God. God has this expectation. It's a beautiful expectation that we will tend to each other and that we'll be mindful of the needs of each other and that we will place the needs of others above our own. That's what it looks like to make sure someone has water on a daily basis. That's the expectation that we need to live into every day. In Christianity, Jesus, God, is often identified as water, living waters. We hold waters holy. In all three faith traditions, we use water in our holy sacraments. We speak about water and we recognize that water is as holy as God has designated it to be. But I need to also place in this conversation today that water can only be as holy as those who have access to it. The accessibility to water, i.e. the accessibility to our Creator, can only maintain its holiness when we all have that. That is what we are called to be as stewards. Our stewardship is around how we engage with each other, how we fight for one another. As advocates, as leaders, as laity, there is an expectation in all three faith traditions. This ethos that we share in all of our faith traditions supersedes and transcends all of our beliefs to the one truth belief that we all have spoken about tonight, that there's an expectation that we be concerned and we care for each other. That is the greatest of all things to do and be. I think we can all agree. That is the stewardship that we all are adhering to today in this conversation. This concept that everyone should have access to clean, affordable drinking water. That is the greatest of all. And I think that's what I wanted to share more importantly tonight than what I had written down. I thought about it and it was clear in the conversation as I heard my two eloquent panelists speak about water and this stewardship, this responsibility we have to each other. There's an accountability that God expects from us. And as Imam corrected me the other day when we were speaking, and it's so true, God also holds each of us accountable to how we engage with the creative process that God has shared with us. That's what we're here today to talk about. How are we treating each other? How does that show up in our stewardship? Thank you so much for allowing me to share that.
Thank you so much, Reverend Roz. Okay, I'm going to spotlight our other panelists, and Reverend Roz is going to facilitate a dialogue between them. But also, just once again, I want to issue an invitation to all of you who are thinking about what the panelists have said and formulating questions, and feel free to drop those in the chat or get ready to unmute yourself when we open up the conversation. Just one moment while I spotlight the other panelists. All right.
Okay, thank you. So the question, I lifted up a question and I shared it with Leah and my two fellow panelists. And so the question that I want to put out today is, what are some challenges or issues that each of us are experiencing in our faith traditions? How do we respond? How do we take accountability for that? How do we show up with our congregation? Whichever one would like to jump in. I'm so sorry. Iman, it looks like you're ready to go ahead and speak. By all means, share.
All right, thank you. Yes, we are very challenged, as a matter of fact, regarding the water issue, particularly here in Detroit and its surroundings. We have done a lot of strides in helping, the city. Well, first of all, let me say this. God does not do anything without a reason. Although the COVID has hit us, a year and a half ago, as much as we don't like it, there are positive aspects of it. And one of the positive aspects is the moratorium that Mike Duggan had enforced until, I believe, end of 2022. We'll see what other challenges we will face in the city of Detroit. But we do have other challenges. Sanitation, as a matter of fact, there was an article recently about the water, I forget which town it was, where it's the water is contaminated, and the governor does not have enough funds to change the whole entire infrastructure and the system to allow good clean water. Rather, she's providing filters and bottles of water. This is not the answer. The answer is to change the infrastructure. Those are challenges that are real. Kids are being affected, everybody, more so children, from the contaminated water that we have. So we do whatever we can on our part. We continue to advocate. Thanks for the PWBC, among other organizations that are the mouthpiece, if you will, for those vulnerable residents who are challenged on a daily basis.
Thank you, Iman. Thank you. Rabbi, would you like to jump in and share how what challenges or issues do our faith traditions have, and how do we respond to that and take responsibility or act on that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think one of the things that strikes me is just the kind of the stakes, how high the stakes are in our tradition. The phrase "Ol Malchut Shamayim," the yoke of the sovereignty of heaven, is something that we pray about every day. That we are carrying that yoke, and that it is our responsibility to be stewards of the highest level, to be protecting the sanctity of the water itself. And as you said, Reverend, the sanctity only goes so far as the people who have access to it and all of creation's ability to access it equitably. And so I think, like with maybe any significant religious responsibility or prescript, this idea that we're actually carrying this yoke and the weight of it is so great. I think that's a place for faith. I want to just, as I was thinking about this, it occurred to me. So the phrase that mekabalim, we receive or we accept, ol malchut shamayim, the yoke of heaven, the yoke of the sovereignty of heaven, ze mize, one to the other. But as I mentioned before, shamayim, which is heaven, is she mayim, of water. So to reread it a little bit differently, it strikes me in this moment that we receive the yoke of water, one person to the other. How are we ensuring our own responsibility for every one of us to have access to clean, safe, and affordable water.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much for sharing that. So let me respond to my question as well. Some of the challenges or issues that Christianity has and that needs to be addressed. So we know in Christianity, and I don't presume to speak for every denomination and every belief, structure system within Christianity for sure, but I want to lift up and challenge the narratives, right? In Christianity, there's some narratives that we need to disrupt and challenge in Christianity when it comes to the challenges and issues of water, right? Of water shutoffs. In Christianity, most especially, there's this narrative of sin, that the reason why people's water is shut off is because of this sin issue, right? It's this sin narrative. And we know that is to be the farthest from the truth, because God is not wrathful in the sense of withholding water, which is what God says God's self is to be, life-giving through water. God would definitely not withhold water from anyone for that reason. So I believe in Christianity, one of the challenges is disrupting and challenging narratives of oppression that we've used over generations and generations. And so in doing that, if we decide that we can come together and recognize that water is a human right, it is one that God has definitely afforded all of us, and that is our way of also in Christianity of accessing God in a metaphorical sense, that God would not withhold God's self, much less water, from anyone. So that is definitely one of the ways we can challenge in Christianity and respond to the negative narratives. And then I also agree with both of you, as we have shared, that it's this piece of stewardship. The second thing I would look at with Christianity is that, and I think this transcends, once again, all three faith traditions. I'm reminded in Jeremiah chapter 5, when God says, if you can find me one just and righteous person, right, to go and speak, and then I'll hold back. But God also makes it clear, don't go to the leaders, he says. Don't go to the leaders he says, don't go to the poor people. He says, go to the leaders. My expectation is that the leaders will do what's right. And we as leaders in our faith traditions, respectively, there's an expectation that we would lead righteously and guide through. And so I lift that up into this conversation as well. Leah, I believe you asked me for a question as well for the audience. And so I'm wondering, would you like that to be lifted up right about now?
Sure, yeah, that sounds good.
So the question I had posed for the audience, I don't know if it's I don't see it in the chat, but I would like to leave this with our audience, our listening audience, is what does your faith tradition inform you as to water stewardship, as to being a steward within community and being concerned about all? I think that the main piece that we've all shared tonight is this expectation and this responsibility that we be concerned and considerate of those in community without water, but also to be responsible and advocates to make sure that all have access to clean, affordable drinking water, as well as clean, affordable housing and food, and just access to a safe and happy home, right? And so I asked the audience today, what does our faith inform us of that? At what point do we recognize that it's this communal thing, it's this community thing, right? And that we're all responsible, and that transcends all faith traditions, I believe. Would either of you like to share in on that or ask anything? Imam or Rabbi, would you like to share?
Just say I'm excited to hear what audience members have to say.
So we've dropped Reverend Roz's question in the chat. How does our faith inform us as to our role in responding to stewardship of water, earth, and each other? It's a big question to take in, so take a moment to kind of articulate your thoughts. Oh, we've got a hand raised. Ventra, go ahead and unmute yourself and respond, please.
Well, first of all, I want to express my great thanks to all of the presenters. I'm just sitting here and my body is absolutely resonating with sheer joy to see the way these great religions have come together in terms of camaraderie and the willingness to engage the kind of work that you do. And we definitely do have to be in a conversation with each other across all lines, certainly of which faith is a big part. I'm retired as adjunct professor of world religion at Henry Ford Community College, and have done a number of, and I'm also an ecology minister. And so my work is in divine earth care, particularly in the Christian tradition, but also in dialogue interfaith as well. And I would say, concerning the question about my perspective is as a Christian, but I would say that because I am retired from the professional pulpit, I still am engaging in what I see as the site of community ministry. And particularly in my role as a community activist, I'm the president of our community association, and we've been dealing, of course, with, like so many of us, with the flooding of the basements and all of that, myself included. And so I have seen my most pivotal role in this regard as being a clearinghouse for information, so that I can help to, in some small way, provide information as to whether it's getting your FEMA documents together, being a sounding ear for those who want to call me and tell me about, you know, a manhole covers off the water's gushing in the street, whatever it might be, providing resources, as well as a listening ear, and also praying for those who want to pray. And helping, and that's a two-way street, because even as I pray with others or talk with others, they also are ministering to me. You know, you can't really give anything to anyone if your own cistern, your own well has run dry, you know, to carry the metaphor forward. So I just want to say that that is where I am practicing my water stewardship, still trying to find the necessary resources in my immediate community to help people not be afraid to reach out to the quote unquote powers that be. Those of us in this group are already empowered because we are the leaders. But as Reverend Roslyn said, and the Imam, and also Rabbi Nate, being the one who stands alongside, and not so much in a hierarchical role, but standing alongside those of our neighbors and loving them as we love ourselves.
Thank you, Dr. Venture. That was beautiful. That was profound. We sure appreciate that. I know I do. Thank you so kindly. I'd like to share this. I'm glad you mentioned FEMA. Tomorrow I'm meeting with a FEMA representative who reached out to my church. And so I'll be, this FEMA representative wants to talk about gathering faith leaders together to share FEMA information to be able to take back to our congregation, to our communities, to our organizations. So I'm going to make sure I share that information with Leah. I'm believing Leah is sharing, making sure she's capturing everyone's email, and I would definitely get that information back out. And maybe we can use this as that catalyst, that pivotal moment where we come back together and gather information and go back out into our communities with that as well. I'd just like to share that. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. So Reverend Ross, if you want to email that to me, I'll make sure it gets included in the follow-up to everybody.
Sounds good. Thank
and
you.
Similarly, if others who are in attendance here, you know, have links that you know, resources that have been useful to your communities, go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll share them out. Yeah. All right, we've got a couple more hands raised. I see David. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Leah. David Arnosti. I'm calling in from Lansing area. And I would like to hear from our panelists their perspectives on how People's Waterboard came together as an interfaith organization. So we're trying to do something like that here in the Lansing area. And was it conceived of as interfaith? Did it just happen spontaneously? Was there a network of people who knew each other before? Could you comment on the People's Waterboard history?
Mind, you want to take that?
Okay, I can take that. I am new. I'm only a couple of years old into the faith outreach committee of the PWB, but I would refer this question to Mary Ellen Howard. Her hand is up. I'm sure she can talk about the history of the what it is now, Interfaith Justice Committee. Before that, it was Faith Outreach Committee, where I had the pleasure to serve with Reverend Roz and Mary Ellen and many of the esteemed colleagues on this Zoom, actually. Would you take that, Mary, please?
I would. The People's Waterboard was formed in about 2005 when the city of Detroit was doing shutoffs. Not huge amounts of shutoffs, but a lot of families were going without water, and the Detroit Water and Sewage Department shuts off your water, and they don't pay attention to who's in the house, whether it's children or babies or disabled or elderly or whatever. Your water gets shut off if you can't pay your bill. If you're poor, it's another way of punishing poor people for poverty. Anyway, this small group of activists rose up. Actually, it was several organizations that were working on the issue and trying to get a water affordability plan adopted by the city of Detroit. In the end, that didn't happen. But the group kept working on the issue. And then when it escalated was at the bankruptcy, 2013 and 14, when our government was taken away from us in the city of Detroit. An emergency manager reporting to the governor was appointed, and he was a bankruptcy attorney. And so he declared bankruptcy. That's what he knew what to do. That's what that was his job. So he declared bankruptcy in Detroit. And we felt the People's Water Board it's not a religious organization, but we felt that there was need for a moral voice, that this was more than a health issue or an economic issue. It was really a moral issue when you talk about human rights. So we wanted to get churches involved, and that's why we formed what was originally called the Faith Outreach Committee, to work with our various denominations and raise the awareness of the problem and mobilize people to join us in recognition of water as a human right. So that's a little background on it.
Mary Ellen, you had your hand raised before. Was there something else you wanted to say or a question?
By the way, Mary Ellen is the president of the PWBC.
I did. I wanted to say that in Michigan, we're surrounded by the Great Lakes, and we are so blessed by that. It's such a blessing to us. But with the blessing, I believe we have the responsibility to protect the Great Lakes. And, so People's Waterboard, although our main issue is affordability, we're working with the folks that are trying to get rid of Line 5 because it's such a threat to the Great Lakes. And, although we have lots of water, there are parts of our country that don't. And you see the pictures on the news of the lakes and rivers drying up out west. And, no doubt they're looking at Michigan and saying, hey, give us some of that water. Let's send some of that down here. And it's predicted that there will be wars fought over water, that it's becoming, a lot of, I don't know the number, but across the world, a lot of people don't have access to clean, affordable water. So I always say that access to water is the right to life issue of the 21st century. And that gets people's attention, especially the right to lifers. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for that.
Leah, I like to share that there was a great article that I'll share. I can also post in the chat, published in the Oxford Academic Public Health Journal, Water Insecurity and Psychosocial Distress Cases, the case studies of Detroit water shutoffs, and is authored by Dr. Nadia Gaber, Andrea Sylvia, Monica Lewis-Patrick, Emily Cattell, Deborah Taylor, and myself, and it lifts up the various cases of water insecurity and what folks have been forced to go through. But then I also wanted to pivot off of what Sister Mary Ellen shared, Sister Mary Ellen, with regard to the water department not being aware of who they're shutting water off on. And I would respectfully have to challenge that, because when we did the research, we were able to find out that the majority of the households, over 75% of the households that were shut off were profiled, and they were Black. They are and were Black women with small children. And as Imam lifted up in when he was sharing out the letter from the People's Waterboard, we know that children are taken from homes when there's no water, right? You lose your children. The city, children are taken from the homes whenever water is not accessible. And in Brightmoor, what was happening was that children were being taken the very day that the water was being shut off. It costs more to house children in foster care systems than it does to reconnect the water. And so I challenge that statement only from the standpoint of watching and being in community as a grassroots frontline provider, that the majority of the households that have been shut off are women, Black women with small children, and who have lost their children. And even when the water moratorium was put into effect, they still have yet to get their children back. So I wanted to lift that up and share that as well. Thank you.
So I'm not seeing other questions in the chat, but please feel free to pop them in or raise your hand as others have done. I wanted to pose a question to our panelists. Oh, and I see, Georgia, you've got your hand raised. I'm gonna get to you in a moment. So the congregations you serve are all, in my opinion, lucky enough, to be hearing about these issues from you. They're getting why this matters, what are the issues, why they should care about it. For those who are connected with faith communities who aren't yet talking about these issues, what ideas do you have about how to get the conversation started? And as I said at the beginning, we're going to be sharing in a moment a link where you can download some sermon resources, right? So that you can have, the spiritual and religious grounding to begin addressing these things. And so that's an ask to get these conversations started. But I'd like to hear from our panelists, what ideas you have about what people who aren't themselves clergy can do, or how they could prompt, their faith leader to take up these issues, which sometimes people want to shy away from because they might fear that they're controversial or politically divisive.
I can jump in first there, and really, I would say that from my perspective, we as a Jewish people are incredibly lucky that our tradition is so rooted in the natural world, that it doesn't take a lot to find rituals and traditions and holidays that connect directly to these topics. So for instance, we're celebrating Sukkot right now. As I mentioned, this is the water holiday. We are literally dancing around in circles in outdoor huts, waving 4 species of plant life, pleading for rain to fall from the sky. So it's not controversial or political in any way to say that this is a rain-based, water-based, ecologically based holiday. I think one of the challenges and opportunities is to figure out how to make those rituals relevant and connected to our time and place. So as I said before, these traditions, holidays, our calendar is based off of a different time and place. It's based off of an arid desert climate many, many miles away. And so Sukkot falling now here in Michigan is a little odd to be asking for rain. And so I think there's a very great and really easy opportunity to move that discussion into, okay, so drought and lack of rain was an issue for the people who originally created these rituals. What are the rituals or acts, ways of being stewards that today in the places that we are could be appropriate and meaningful for this holiday? What would it mean to support the People's Waterboard? What would it mean to write elected officials or make phone calls, particularly related to water, showing up to a Line 5 action, right? All of these, I think, would be perfectly meaningful and appropriate steps to take through this holiday. And lastly, I'll just say at Chazon Detroit, where I work, we've taken the 4 species that we traditionally wave, which are shipped from halfway across the world, from Israel or Egypt. And we've actually created alternatives over the last number of years for local versions of those. So instead of shipping these lulavim and etrogim, they're called, from so far away and causing the pollution and the increased emissions from that shipment, and being disconnected from species that are not growing here and are growing so far away. How does it change our experience of the holiday and our connection to the place where we live when we actually harvest our own lulavim and etrogim and actually create these ritual bundles from the plant species and plant life that grows right here around us?
So I thank you, Rabbi. I like to offer, Leah, that a couple of tools, a couple of things I would always suggest that folks organize in their congregations and their communities through block clubs, as we heard from Dr. Ventra. You would be surprised to who in your community or that you may know who have experienced water insecurity or know someone who's experiencing water insecurity, right? There's the tool of advocacy, which Rabbi just offered, writing to our local and state elected officials. Then there was this wonderful, the city of Detroit, the city charter, right? The city charter, which was just the Prop P part of the election that we just saw, the section of the election that was just voted down, and because it was given and it was, it was presented as something that was not true. But in the city charter, there was the water affordability amendment in the charter, right? There was an opportunity to make sure that no one would be without water, that no one could be put out of their homes through the over-assessed property taxes. And so there's an opportunity that's coming up that we can go back and we can revisit that. But in the meantime, in the interim, I suggest that folks, and I'll put this in the chat as well, the Detroit People's Platform is a great organization to connect with, who does great advocacy work. I'm a member of the Detroit People's Platform, but I've been sitting with them since the inception. And so I know the work that's done as far as organizing and advocating and tools that we can build and use to change and shift public policy, because until we change and shift public policies, nothing's going to happen. So we know that water affordability is what's righteous and just, but we also know that to get that done, we have to organize. We have to organize in our communities, in our churches, in the basements, in our on our block clubs. Then there's food pantries. The food pantry, Brightmoor Connection, we have water stations, right, where folks can pick up water. We've raised monies where we paid water bills for families and restored not only water, but got the piping and plumbing fixed. And then we paid for attorney fees for folks to get their kids back. So there's a number of ways that people can, step into the advocacy, into this conversation. And not everything is meant for everybody. And I get that. Everybody may not show up at a march. Everybody may not show up, down at City Hall, but there's opportunity for all of us to be stewards of each other and to be concerned about how each of us are living. The fallacy, I believe, is that since the pandemic, the rise of COVID-19, that water has been made accessible. I know the city of Detroit put that narrative out, right? That everybody's water was turned back on, and that's the farthest from the truth. Most of the folks whose water was shut off, the water has not been restored. And then folks are still getting shut off right now as we speak. And they need to make sure we put that into this conversation as well. That is a reality and a truth that cannot be denied. Families are still being shut off from water as we speak. And so it is the outcry of many, right? And it begins with one voice, and we come together with that. So I offer that in, and I'll put my information in and put in some other information. People's Waterboard is a great organization to connect with. It's a great tool, along with We the People, along with Brightmore Connection, along with Detroit People's Platform, and most especially Michigan Interfaith Power and Light. We can all come together and agree that this is the work we need to have done. So yes, I just want to share that. And then if your church is not lifting this up, if it's not being discussed, then that's a conversation that I would ask and offer, that any person that's experiencing that in their congregation, go to your leader, go to the person who is informing your faith, right? Who is teaching and, and stretching and challenging, seeking to challenge you in your faith, right? And ask, why is it that we're not speaking about what people are experiencing every day? What is the expectation God has of us to love our neighbor? And how does that love show up in action? We know love is just justice in action, right? That's what love really is. It's just justice being acted out daily. So that's the first role of advocacy. If you're not hearing about it in your church, if your leader's not speaking about it, then your first assignment as a deputized advocate is to go to your leader and say, hey, you know what? I heard this conversation about water shutoffs. I would ask that you would lift that up more on Sunday morning, whenever your congregation meets. And this uncomfortable conversation in my congregation is a daily, it's a daily conversation, and it's every Sunday, it's a conversation that's woven into the text, because it has to be, because that's life right now as we live it, right? And that's what we're required to do, is to be better, not just today, but tomorrow, and for everybody else. So yeah, nobody gets a pass. We all are accountable. Well, all of us have a responsibility.
That's right. That's right. I saw Georgia's hand up. Georgia, are you still there? I'd like to invite you to ask your question. And then we've got one more hand up that I want to get to before we close out.
Oh, no. Yes, I'm here, but go ahead. I see that Mr. Carey's hand is up. He could go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, well, it's just a comment. First of all, my daughter invited me to this forum. First time I've ever even heard about it. I'm a pastor in the heart of Detroit. And I really want to echo what Reverend Roslyn was just saying. In 30 plus years of pastoring, I have never tackled conversations around stewardship of the environment. In a non-mainline Christian denomination, many denominations in liturgical calendars will focus on different themes because the liturgical calendar will focus on it. But independent churches that don't follow liturgical calendars, they set their preaching schedules, et cetera, based on whatever it is that they feel led to do. And so I really echo what Reverend Roslyn was saying, that I think it's important and incumbent upon us to reach out to senior leaders and not so much make them get in zones that they may not be comfortable, but just say, is it possible in the rhythm of the year and the rhythm of just the preaching year to have a moment that stewardship of creation, stewardship of God's world is woven into their content. And I mean, shamefully, after 30 years of ministry, this is the first year that I'm incorporating content around the subject of stewardship of the environment. And honestly, if it had not been for my daughter and her work with National Wildlife Federation and her saying, Dad, I've been in your house my whole life and I've never heard you talk about what God says about the earth. I'm like, oh, this is embarrassing. So I just want to encourage other people that are here that are faith leaders or in churches or in synagogues or mosques, that I think sometimes it can be uncomfortable for a leader who's never done that to be challenged to be an advocate or to be an activist. Maybe that may not be their lane. But if we are stewards of scripture and holy writings, then it is incumbent for us to actually share the whole gospel, so, or the whole content of scripture. So I just really am grateful for this forum, you all. This is, you have no idea what this has meant to me. So thank you for the work that you all are doing, and keep it up.
What a delight to hear that, Pastor Carey. That's awesome. That's one of the coolest things I've heard all day. That you know, you're going to commit to talking about this, and that's a new thing, and you're going into that territory. Georgia, please jump in.
I just wanted to go back to piggyback off, and thank you, Reverend Carey. That is wonderful. Your daughter must be Tiffany. So, yeah. Wonderful. I just wanted to say also, I'm a part of the Michigan ILP, as well as the new outreach engagement coordinator. And it is a wonderful task to have to take on, to be able to be boots on the ground, to take that to our congregations. But we're also pastors, and we've been pastors for almost for over 20, near 25 years now, here in the city of Detroit, and missionaries around the world. And like Reverend Carey, we had not heard this conversation until we started to become a part of 2030 and the sustainable movement here inside of Detroit. But I wanted to just say what Reverend Ross said, we have to all take the responsibility. And like Proverbs 31 said, 31, 8 and 9 says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute, and speak up and judge fairly and defend the rights of the poor and the needy. And when you said that, Reverend Ross, it just really echoed inside of my heart, because on our streets, there are so many things that we can do, especially for those who cannot speak up for themselves, those single moms, those ones with children. And I have not heard the seniors. Seniors cannot get outside, and they cannot go out when it's raining like it is. They cannot clear the leaves from the drainways. They cannot do just small things that we can do. And we need to teach and train up our children to do those things, that if they can put down the devices, go out, build a rain garden, do some of those other things. There are so many things, and I don't want to get on my soapbox and start preaching right now, because I will. And just to say, I really and truly thank God for this platform, for Leah and Jen, and the entrust that they have placed in all of us in doing this work, and the pioneers like Sister Mary Ellen, and all of you, the Imam and the Rabbi. Thank you guys so much for what you do, and taking the good news around to make sure that we can have a future for our children. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that.
I wanted to pivot off of what Georgia said. You know, the seniors are often not lifted up, but then also seniors cannot afford these water bills, right? They cannot afford the water, sewage, and drainage bills. Single folks cannot. We know that the single men and single women cannot. It is bad right now for all, and I need to lift up those who are the most disinherited in community, and that includes felons, right? If you're a convicted felon, you can't get housing, you can't get food stamps, you can't get a job, so you have no access to water as well. No one should be without water. It does not matter, and that was the point of disrupting the narrative, right? And challenging, because I believe God expects us to challenge the sacred text and say, okay, are you saying this as well, right? There's an expectation that we, as you so eloquently put it, lift up voices, the silent voices from the text and the silent voices from our communities, right? And so that's what we see happening every day. And so there's an expectation that in that stewardship, that not only do we challenge and be that voice of advocacy, but it's an uncomfortable place, right? That we are called to be uncomfortable. In Christianity, the disciples were uncomfortable. They left good jobs. They were fishermen. Jesus called them. They left their places of work, and they followed him down this road, right? There's an expectation that we should not be comfortable. And then what does comfortability really look like for us in relationship, in juxtaposition to someone who is without water, right? No one should be comfortable when others are not. Yeah, so it is uncomfortable to lift it up in the pulpit. I know my first sermon ever around water stewardship and environmentalism, right? I was like, whoa, people are gonna be mad at me. But at the end of the day, I gotta go to sleep, right? And so I have to answer to my creator. Yeah. So that's that piece there. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. As promised, I am dropping a link to a form where you can sign up for sermon resources from Christian, Jewish, and Muslim traditions to talk about these issues in your congregation. If you're a layperson or if you're a faith leader, these are available to you. We'll follow up with that by email as well. And then I also wanted to invite you all and let you know about the next event in our Watershed Moment series. That is going to be on Sunday, October 3rd. This will all be in the email too, and Jennifer has put the link to that event in the chat. But this session is going to be about putting faith into action as relates to reducing your drainage fee, installing rain gardens, kind of practical on the ground ways that you can be a better steward of our watershed. And then we've got a third and final event in the series in the works that's going to be about looking at our regional responsibility, city and suburbs, around protecting this watershed. And we'll let you know about that when the details are ready. And so with that, I just want to thank all of you for coming, and especially thank our esteemed panelists for all of the wisdom that you have dropped on us, for the thoughtful questions that the audience shared. And yeah, if you want to stay connected with our work, you can also like us on Facebook. That link is in the chat. So I think we have it. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Leah. Thank
for
you,
having this
Jennifer.
program. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Yes.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you, Michigan Interfaith Power and Light.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
guys.
Okay, good night.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Bless you all.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Hey, Doc, how you doing?
Okay, how about you?
I'm all right, thanks. Good to see
Hi,
you.
Tiffany.
Good.
Tiffany.
Yes, good to see everybody.
Good to see you all.
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.